China unveils a $1.4 trillion local debt package, but no direct stimulus. Welcome to Market Insight, I'm Ramzan Karamali. Well, as the world's second largest economy suffers from flagging growth and faces the pressure from the re-election of Donald Trump as US president, Beijing announced plans to ease local government financing strains. But the offshore yuan weakened, US-listed shares of Chinese firms slid, and European luxury and automotive stocks fell after the package was unveiled. So are investors right to be disappointed by the latest set of measures? Well, to help answer that and more, I'm joined by Chris Beauchamp, Chief Market Analyst at IG. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Well, let's start with the investors and how they've taken this news. They don't seem impressed at all. Are they right to be this disappointed?
Yes, I think they are, really. China's stimulus promises have been large, but the reality is failed to deliver. And the problem is they engendered such a huge bounce in Chinese equities. This was the big stimulus that people have been waiting for, or supposed to be, and it just doesn't live up to the hype. I don't think anyone wants to see a debt headline on a Friday, but that's what they got. And until there's something a bit more, quite literally concrete, I think in this case, I think the disappointment will continue.
Yes, it doesn't really help the property sector directly, does it? And that seems to be the issue.
No, it doesn't, and it seems to be fiddling around the edges with something that is arguably unimportant to the bigger stagflation issues facing the Chinese economy. You can argue they're a lot more deeply rooted than you can deal with in terms of fiscal stimulus, but it would help. And for a market that's been searching vainly for this for at least a year, if not 2 years now, it is just more disappointment.
Now, I mentioned in my introduction the return of Donald Trump to the White House. He's been consistent in his talk on tariffs and in particular on China. So just how damaging could his plans be to China and other big economies?
Well, certainly if he was to go for the 60% he promises, then yes, that's a nightmare scenario for the Chinese economy. It probably won't be that bad. I think almost it likes to be known as a deal maker. So there's the argument, well, clearly the Chinese can counter. You might find them arguing him down to something more reasonable. And I suppose markets might actually take that as a net positive. But certainly, any tariff is bad news for a Chinese economy that is in a fundamentally weak position now compared to where it was just a few years ago. And yes, everyone else as well. And it will resonate across the globe. We've seen the FTSE, we've seen the DAX weaker off the back of this China news. If the news from China gets worse, if the tariffs come in, they will suffer further.
Now, yesterday, the Fed cut rates by 25 basis points. But how could a Trump re-election cloud the outlook?
Well, it makes life a lot more difficult for the Fed, really. Big fiscal spending, but also tariffs makes an inflationary resurgence much more likely, and that is clearly what's worrying the Fed. Now, Powell was noticeably diplomatic about this yesterday, saying they weren't really wargaming this yet because nothing had been announced, but clearly they are. Just that they can't be seen. It's a febrile atmosphere, I think, at the moment in Washington, and Powell has to tread very, very carefully. But it will make their life a lot more difficult. We'll have to see how it shows up and when it shows up in the data. The market is probably expecting that they'll have to ease back on cutting rates. But for the time being, Powell's message was business as usual. We're not going to jump around and react too quickly when there's nothing as yet that has been announced.
Now, the Fed wasn't alone in cutting rates. The Bank of England also cut rates, but sounded pretty cautious about future easing. Is this down to the extra inflationary pressures we seem to have got inherited from last week's budget alone, or is there more to it than just that?
Well, I suppose the budget plays the most obvious role, but I think here again, the Trump shadow isn't far away, really. How does this affect the global economy? Where will we be in 6 months' time? In a manner that's very, very different to what we'd have expected with the continuation of the Biden presidency under Harris. So the UK won't be immune from that. But yes, we've already got warnings from the supermarkets this week about higher prices for consumers. So the danger for the UK is having only really just seen signs of inflation really peaking and being behind us in terms of strong price rises. I think there's the risk that it can make a return, and that scuppers the BOE's plans to gently ease into next year.
Chris Beauchamp from IG, many thanks for your thoughts. And that's Market Insight. Don't forget you can watch more videos on Reuters.com.